Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today we're continuing on with another Rotted request, this time coming from patron Ben Grimm, who asked me to take a look at the 1999 Schwarzenegger movie, End of Days. And when I asked Ben why this movie? He said, well, December is full of Christmas stuff, but also has New Year's on the horizon, and there is no more iconic New Year's celebration in our generational lifetime than the one in 1999. We get to see Arnie as an action hero, we get to see New York City before it was cleaned up, and we get to see Gabriel Byrne as the devil. Fair enough. Now, before I get into this review, I do want to just remind folks that tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be going live for a New Year's Eve kind of celebratory year-end wrap-up live stream. I do hope to see you there. I think it's going to be a fun time. I'm going to be answering some questions and just generally shooting the shit to close out the new year. So, End of Days, 1999. And this movie opens up in, well, 1999. Everybody's freaked out about Y2K. Everybody's expecting the end of the world as we know it. Planes falling from the sky, elevators falling down shafts, the whole bit. And in the midst of this, we are paid a visit by Satan. Showing up as kind of an invisible predator shimmer, he invades the body of Gabriel Byrne, who is now his earthly vessel, and is seeking out something. Meanwhile, apparently the devil needs security detail in the form of hired private security, including Arnold Schwarzenegger and his partner played by 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺. And sure enough, the security detail actually comes in handy because a sniper attempts to take the devil out. Schwarzenegger gets in the way, a chase ensues, action hero mayhem, until finally the investigation starts going down a bit of a rabbit hole as far as who the sniper was, what his motivation was, and we come to find out that this thing that the devil is looking for is a woman, a very specific woman who decades prior was born under a very interesting celestial light, and unbeknownst to her has been raised and groomed to become the mother of Satan's child. So interesting enough premise, and I dig the idea of Arnold Schwarzenegger in another horror movie, and I think that this was my second viewing of it. I had recalled watching it previously, but if I have, it was back in 1999, back in the theater, because it has been a while. I remembered very little of it, so this was a good fresh viewing for me. And there were aspects of it that worked for me, and some, well, plenty that didn't. As far as what worked, I thought that Arnold's performance was decent. It was a little bit hollow, but I don't think that was him. I think that was the character and how it was written. It was the kind of grizzled, constant 5 o'clock shadow, gin-soaked, suicidal tendency ex-cop trope that was well worn by the time this movie came out. But even considering how much of a common character stereotype this was, I thought that he pulled it off fairly well. 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺 did a great job as his partner. He provided a little bit of levity, a little bit of counterbalance to everything, and especially in a movie that had this dour of a tone, it was important to have a little bit of a lighter moment happening here and there, and I thought it was refreshing. It kind of reminded me of Tom Arnold as Schwarzenegger's counterpart in True Lies, just kind of fitting that role and doing it pretty darn well. And Gabriel Byrne clearly had a whole lot of fun playing Satan. He really chewed up every scene that he was in, and I admired that. I think he had more fun in this than he had in Stigmata, which came out the same year, and because Ben mentioned New York City before it was cleaned up, that was an excellent component of this as well. This movie really felt grimy and dirty and visceral, and the setting helped that greatly, especially getting towards the last act of the film. And the last thing that worked for me pretty darn well before I start getting into some of the negative things was it wasn't afraid to take chances. This was a movie that, especially when we're kind of looking at an action star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, it really did go hard in some places. It had some visual elements to it that I was just kind of honestly surprised to see on the screen. It was a little bit brave in places, and I tip my hat to that, especially again, since we're talking about a mainstream action horror movie. All right, so the things that didn't work for me, I think mostly what it comes down to is we really were talking about every single character in this being a fairly common stereotype and a little bit hollow therein. Yes, the actors portray them fairly well, but that didn't make them spring off the page nearly as well as having a more realistic, well-rounded character would have. But taking into account, at the same time, we're talking about a late 90s Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie. So, yeah, there is that level of expectation meeting reality, and what this film's intention was, which is an aspect of the score, yeah, I think it pulled it off fairly well. The big problem that I had, more than anything else with this movie, was the tone. It just seemed like it was a little bit too confused about what it was trying to be. It was an action movie and it was a horror movie, and those two things, it's a little tricky to kind of get them working well together. That's not to say that every movie should fit into one category or another perfectly neatly. However, there are aspects of horror movies that don't work as action elements and vice versa. For instance, when we have a character who's basically just a walking brick wall getting tossed here and there and everywhere and seemingly without any damage to him, that kind of makes it a little tricky on the horror elements. Horror is kind of predicated on the idea of mortal risk, of injury, of anything along those lines that makes you kind of fear for the characters. We're walking in the shoes of the protagonist and we are fearing for their lives. But when they're literally dangling from the wire of a helicopter and pulling off insane stunts and getting smashed here and there with barely a band-aid to be found, it takes away from the fear factor a little bit. It kind of takes away from the horror. The risk is a little bit, well, dulled. It's difficult to find things scary when there's no real stakes involved. And yes, there were storyline stakes and plotline stakes that included the demise of mankind, but that was out there. We're with him in here, in this little room, in this little refrigerator, and there's a lot of opportunities to have some good scary moments, but it doesn't work if he's invulnerable. It's honestly a complaint I have about a lot of action movies, horror notwithstanding, movies like The Transporter. How many times can somebody go through that and be completely invulnerable before the movie just starts getting boring? Visually interesting, yes, but boring. Overall, I did like End of Days. I don't think it was a fantastic movie, but it was entertaining enough. And again, we're kicking on a 90s action movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. You get what you get. But thank you, Ben, for recommending this movie, and thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.